Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us to the EUROCONTROL Stakeholder Forum webinar today, a platform which provides both civil and military aviation stakeholders the possibility to discuss actual and future challenges as global as possible for the aviation. My name is Remus Lăcătuș, in the Civil Military Cooperation Division of EUROCONTROL, and I'm going to be your moderator today. The topic is about the evolution of the flexible use of airspace and the enhancement of civil-military cooperation in air traffic management. It's the second webinar we organize on this topic as a follow-on to the Global Civil-Military Aviation Summit organized last year by EUROCONTROL in cooperation with ICAO. During the first webinar, we have addressed operational aspects, discussing with the military airspace user, an ANSP, and also technical requirements to enhance system and procedural interoperability. Today, we are discussing with key international organizations entrusted by states with responsibilities in the civil-military air traffic management domain. And they are ICAO, NATO, the European Defense Agency, and EUROCONTROL. During the Global Civil-Military Aviation Summit, the participants have discussed high-level views and have made high-level recommendations. What we try to do with these webinars is to translate those high-level views in practical actions from policy level down to operational and tactical levels. The summit has identified clearly the why we need to evolve the FUA and why we need to enhance civil-military cooperation, and also have identified the end state, what needs to be achieved. We try to identify the how we need to act in order to achieve those high-level goals. The participants to the summit have fully acknowledged that airspace management and the associated concepts are a full competency of states within their sovereign national airspaces. However, they identified that security and defense interests, as well as the economical interests of the states, goes beyond borders. And this makes also a very clear touch on the cross-border nature of both civil and military aviation. When it comes to the why we need to evolve the FUA concept, there are some clear rationales behind. We talk about the evolution of the global security environment with multiple crises and conflicts, which are affecting the efficiency of traffic flows due to the increased military activities. We are talking also about the evolution of civil and military aviation technology. We see more and more new entrants in the classical air traffic management domain, from both higher airspace operations and U-space operations, which requires a flexible and dynamic integration. We talk also about the need to enhance international cooperation. That is a clear rationale for which we have invited today the representatives of the mentioned international organization. The question to be addressed today stays in how the flexible use of airspace concept should evolve in order to enable international organizations to fulfill the responsibilities entrusted by states, and also how they could cooperate in order to support the states for a synchronized and harmonized implementation of the solutions that in the end aims at achieving more dynamicity and flexibility in both the management and usage of the airspace. Please let me now to introduce you our speakers today. We brought together from ICAO, Pascal Luciani, who is Deputy Director for Air Navigation and Aviation Safety in Air Navigation Bureau. From NATO, we have Stefan Hansen, responsible for aerospace planning, security, and policy in the Defense Investment Division at NATO HQs. From the European Defence Agency, we have Christophe Vivier, head of the Single European Sky Unit. And last but not least, my colleague Giuseppe Acampora, head of Project Coordination and Implementation Unit in the Airspace Capacity Division of the Eurocontrol Network Manager. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and we are looking forward to your views and to your discussions today. As of organization of the webinar, each panelist will deliver a speech by sharing the floor for approximately 35 minutes. That session will be followed then by a questions and answers session, which will take approximately 20 minutes. That is your session, dear attendees, and you have the possibility to submit questions using the questions and answer function. Whenever you encounter any technical problem, you can use also the chat function to communicate with us. By saying that, I think you are impatient to listen to our panelists. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours, and we start with Pascal.
Thank you very much, Remus. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this webinar on a topic which is a high-stakes topic in today's aviation, and one over which a lot has been done already, but over which a lot needs to be done. I'd like to start with a few words of introduction to resituate the context and what is at stake here. First of all, I'd like to go into why civil-military cooperation, and especially the flexible use of airspace, is important and where it comes from. It's based on a set of principles in a context that has been evolving, in the reality of new technologies, and on the realities of synergies. Let me elaborate on this to start with, and with that, I will share a few slides. I hope everyone is seeing them. The principles on which the respective roles of civil aviation and military aviation has been enshrined in the Chicago Convention, and it has ruled the relations between military and civil operations since the beginning and the inception of ICAO, and those principles are destined to continue, and we have to bear them in mind when we construct civil-military cooperation. I will go over three important articles. I'm sure a lot of you know them, but it's not useless to remind them. The sovereignty and the fact that contracting states have complete sovereignty over the airspace above its territory, which means the land areas and the territorial waters thereto under the sovereignty protection or mandate of such state. This is a fundamental principle without which we cannot have the civil-military cooperation. Another extremely important principle is the relationship between civil aviation and state aircraft, and the clear injunction that the convention shall be applicable only to civil aircraft and not to state aircraft encompassing the military and other uses of that are relevant to the state. However, the D of the Chicago Convention, Article 3, introduces the principle of the due regard for safety, and that's the major element on which we base that cooperation. With the autonomy and the fact that the rules of civil aviation do not apply to military, comes the big responsibility of being something like a big brother, watching over, paying attention to the regard for safety of civil aircraft, while not being themselves submitted to the rules of civil aviation.
Pascal, your slides aren't showing.
Sorry?
Your slides aren't showing.
Oh, my slides aren't showing?
No. Seems like we cannot see them, but I can see them. But apparently the audience cannot see them.
Okay, well, I'll try to describe them then. So we've just seen the text of the Chicago Convention, Articles 1, 2, and 3. We are now looking at a map where we see on the left side the future traffic in 2030, 2040, And on the right side, a map of all the areas which are either prohibited, restricted, or danger related to military. I've chosen to show a map of the Middle East. I know one of my colleagues will show a map of Europe a little bit later. And these two maps show the same thing, that the airspace is getting incredibly tighter and that the traffic is getting incredibly bigger. And this means that over the last years, we have come to the realization that cohabitation was necessary and that there was a need to enhance this cooperation in order to save the airspace. The third element I wanted to go over is that new technologies allow us to better cooperate in real time, to enhance communication, to enhance data exchange, to enhance management. And these are the tools that solve the previous elements. And finally, the synergies. The synergies are that, in general, a lot of the military activities are limited in time, be they activities related to crisis or even conflicts, which is the minority of the situations, or ordinary defense, training, or other operations. And this gives rise to the possibility of having the flexible use of airspace. Now, what are we looking at? When we are looking at the benefits, in fact, the civil-military cooperation is a response to all 5 of ICAO's key objectives. First and foremost, safety. Safety is the fundamental in flexible use of airspace. We focus a lot of capacity, and this is indeed what it's about, but the ultimate goal is safety. And this is what we have as a goal. And what we need is to ensure that there is never a situation in which a civil aviation aircraft is endangered, and also where the safety of the military aircraft is secured. The second one is capacity. I mentioned it, but we also have the 3 other objectives of ICAO. The economic impact, because flexible use of airspace is going to be able to free up expenses, to make routes shorter, to make routes more efficient, to avoid delay, and that's beneficial for air operators, the passengers, and the economy in general. Of course, environment. When we're talking about the environmental and problems of aviation, let's not forget that there are a lot of situations where we can have win-win, where we can enhance the efficiency of aviation and at the same time make benefits, and no one loses in that. And finally, security. The civil-military cooperation is what ensures that our skies keep secure, that interceptions can be done appropriately, that we always have the Air Force, that the member states always have the Air Force available where they need it. So we have a project that is as the core of the goals of ICAO. How do we achieve this? Well, I would like to emphasize 2 main principles that we want to base on. The first one is communication. Communication is the key to the success of most endeavors, be they human endeavors, be they winning a war, be they landing a rocket on the moon, or be it having a harmonized and happy marriage. Communication is the key. This is emphasized in the documents that we are developing, and this is in fact how we not only succeed in FUA, but also in general cooperation. The second element is the long term. You do not improvise civil-military cooperation or the flexible use of airspace. It's built long term. And that's why we separate 3 different time lengths for the civil-military cooperation. One of them is the collaboration, which is 15, 20 years ahead, and which is a vital step in ensuring that civil-military cooperation. The cooperation itself, which is the medium term, and finally the coordination, which is the fine-tuning in the tactical levels. The FUA manual is an evolution from a circular which focused on cooperation in air traffic management to a more holistic approach centered on the flexible use of airspace, but not limited to that element. And what I will not be able to make a full presentation of document 10088, and most of you know a lot about it, but I would like to emphasize that this document is not only about the flexible use of airspace, and also focuses on areas such as interoperability. Interoperability is the key to the success of civil military operations, and it comprises both material and technical components, and also some human and training factors. The fact that increasingly the military are in some areas, and when the operations permit, voluntarily adhering to some of the rules of civil aviation, while of course retaining their autonomy, is a significant improvement. The fact also that many of the ATCs and pilots in the military forces are trained to the civilian procedures is not only good for them when their military career ends and they need to find new jobs, but also very good for that civil-military cooperation. Talking about flexible use of airspace, it must be reminded that there are different levels. And the goals that we have for the future in ICAO is to make sure that most regions move from the more basic FUA to the more advanced level of FUA. The basic FUA, to describe it simply, is describing and putting a time limit to the various zones which are either prohibited or restricted or danger. And the more advanced and enhanced FUAs, the dynamic utilizations and changes of routes. And this is in particular useful as we move to the trajectory-based objectives, and the free routes are in development. And this cooperation brings benefits for all. Of course, for the civil aviation sector, and also for the military, who can be sure that they have direct communications and that they can in direct time react and have input on the civil aviation flow, thereby ensuring security and safety. So we're in those areas. We are moving from the strategic level to the pre-tactical level and to the tactical level. The future of FUA is cross-border flexible use of airspace. There are very few countries in the world which are big enough that FUA within that country by itself is significant. And when I think about Europe, and there are many other regions like this, in Europe, well, you're in 3 minutes, 5 minutes of flight, and you've already crossed a frontier. And therefore, we can only build a flexible use of airspace based on a cross-border approach. This will require trust between the member states, of course. This will require means of communications. This will require also protecting the information of the military. And that's one of the key evolutions in the future. We have at the same time to communicate and preserve confidential national security information related to either military aircraft or the other types of aircraft. So this is the goal that we have to have for the future. And another element that we have to look into is the integration of the other state aircraft. What we're doing for the civil and military cooperation is also a guide for cooperation with the work of police, with the work of customs enforcement. One last word, which will more be an open point, and I know there will be questions about it. Indeed, the main challenge we will face in the coming decades is the integration of the new entrants of RPAS, of high altitude operations. This is a huge challenge. Just if we look at it in ICAO from the perspective of just the civilian traffic, this is a huge challenge. Having the integration of RPAS in the non-segregated airspace, having the development of civilian UAM is an incredible challenge. But if we mix this with the military, you add the military or RPAS, then the equation is very complicated. And initiatives like the one we are having here is a clear way forward so that we succeed together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for your interesting insights. Obviously, we see that the approach is towards the development of a cross-border FUA based on long-term strategic approach for collaboration, cooperation, and coordination between civil and military, by considering fully that ICAO framework refers to civil aviation, and then military aviation needs to be collaborative throughout this approach. Communication and interoperability are clear action lines to ensure effective civil-military cooperation in air traffic management. Thanks again, and I give the floor now to Stefan, please.
Thank you very much, Remus. Thank you for the invite to be here today. This is twice in 2 months that I have the opportunity to speak with the community about flexible use of airspace. And thank you very much for Pascal for your introduction, because my speaking points are very similar. I wanted to talk about the fact that, like ICAO, NATO is a treaty organization, and that I wanted to show some of the differences and similarities between the organizations as we get into this FUA discussion. So a lot of you know from the Chicago Convention, if you go back to the preamble, we talk about the fact that there is a desire to avoid friction, promote cooperation between nations and people upon which the peace of the world depends. And the idea in the preamble talks about creating and preserving friendship and understanding, developing aviation in a safe and orderly manner, and basically making sure that international air transport services can be established on an equality of opportunity kind of basis and operated soundly and economically. Completely different, though, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was created by the North Atlantic Treaty not too far after ICAO. And it's much different. As in the parties, it's basically a defense and security organization, both political and military, and it focuses on the peace of all the peoples and all the governments in the world in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. That there exists the organization to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, civilization of the peoples, and founded on principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. And the idea of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is to promote stability and well-being in the region and unite efforts for collective defense and preservation of peace and security. And NATO, we focus on 3 core missions, which are deterrence and defense, crisis prevention and management, and cooperation and security. So while the organizations may seem different, they actually have a lot of similar intent, which I like to talk about the fact that both organizations want to work on peace, they want to work on cooperation, and they want to work on stability. Our differences, though, is our focus. I mean, ICAO focuses on international air transport services and their equality of opportunity, while we focus on deterrence, defense, peace, and security. But once again, I think that the 2 organizations are very similar in the sense that we try to respect and promote all our signatories' sovereignty, respect for the rule of law, and unify approaches to problem solving. So while we're 2 different things in the world, I think we have a lot of areas where we cross. One of the things we do in our air part of NATO a lot is we refer a lot of the concepts and ideas and guidelines and agreements at the ICAO. And one of the things we look at a lot is the guidelines for airspace management that ICAO has. And just a reminder of everyone, airspace should be managed flexibly and whenever feasible. It needs to have a process to incorporate dynamic flight paths and provide for optimal operational solutions. Segregation should be minimized, should minimize the impact on operations if we have to segregate. Airspace should be coordinated and monitored and to accommodate conflicting requirements, as we'll talk about more today. Airspace should be coordinated in advance when possible, and complexity may limit flexibility. And from a NATO perspective, all these general guidelines on airspace management are very common sense approach to airspace. And the Allies will apply them as they see fit in their own sovereign airspace, since each party to our treaty is a sovereign nation. Looking at the ICAO flexible use of airspace concept, which I think has been around since 1996, we talk about it is an airspace management concept. It's a methodology of capacity management. Notice that airspace should be designated as purely military, should not be designated as purely military or civilian airspace, which from a NATO perspective, we don't designate airspace that way. Airspace is a national asset. It belongs to nations, and how they manage it internally into every country is different. And that also the FUA concept says the airspace should be considered as continuum, which all the users' requirements should be accommodated to the greatest extent possible. And those priorities, obviously, every ally in NATO decides on what their internal priorities are for their airspace use. But once again, the Alliance's perspective is that airspace is a sovereign resource that belongs to each allied member, and they will decide how they manage the airspace. One of the things I wanted to highlight, though, and I've talked about this yesterday, actually, and last month also, is that we have to acknowledge some of the realities surrounding the civil air traffic situation that we have in Europe. The first thing, a lot of you know, we have 27 air traffic control systems with over 60 air traffic control centers and 650 airspace sectors. And this does not include any of the military air navigation service providers. And many, if not all, these sectors are structured on state boundaries. Every state has a different route charging system, so there is no consistency across Europe. And we all know that airlines are businesses, and for them, planning is essential. And so the quickest route is not always the cheapest route. Long-term planning to coordinate maintenance, aircraft, and crews is already a very complex problem they have. And with the volatile reality of weather and other factors, daily corrections to this complex problem for them, it's very difficult to get new crews, new airplanes. Just a maintenance problem can cause problems that could be huge. You know, military activities in the temporary airspaces in Europe have increased over the last decade, 3 to 12-fold in some parts of Europe. And Eurocontrol last year has noted that nearly 90% of the flight delays that were caused over 2023 were due to capacity and staffing, airline and airport issues, weather, and disruptions of ATM services such as strikes. And in 2023, the other 10% of reasons there was delays in the larger air traffic control system, only 3% of those delays were due to military training or activities. And that is when we also had the largest aviation exercise in NATO's history, Air Defender 2023. So I think we're doing pretty good. So for flexible airspace for use, concept to be effective, it needs to be holistic to the entire aviation industry, working with all the stakeholders. And obviously the military and the defense and security institutions of the various countries have to be there also. But I think, you have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of the issues right now in our present airspace structure are not due to military activities. They're due to other things that are beyond the military's control. We have a lot of talking now about the F-35 and future types of aircraft, and there's always going to be a defense and security training requirements. And we mentioned that, already with the war, Russia's aggression in the Ukraine, we have a huge increase in activity already happening in the East. Europe is no longer at peace. And to properly show deterrence, deter an enemy aggression, and defend and provide security for the alliance, we need to make sure that our air forces and our military forces are trained. And the new fighters we have, and the new aircraft we have, require larger airspaces. And in many cases, the airspace is larger than some of the countries in Europe. So it's very difficult to try to find that. And we're working on solutions with the allies to see in bilateral and multilateral approaches to this. We need to train because we have to show potential aggressors that we can defend ourselves. And as the technology continues to advance, the airspace structures and the altitudes required are continue to get larger. Allies are really realize that, airspace is a critical resource, not just for the military and security apparatus of their country, but also for their commercial and other private use. But the fact is they have to find that proper balance. And future concepts of flexible use of airspace, they have to have a key consideration is that we need to have proper military training, day-to-day training, and military exercises to properly demonstrate our ability to defend and provide security for our nations. Another point I wanted to bring up was the higher airspace operations and new entrants, and thanks for touching on that, Pascal. The European Commission working with the CESAR joint undertaking and Eurocontrol have been really working hard on this. And over the last 2 years, that we finished not too long ago, ECHO and now upcoming ECHO 2, this looking at how commercial space operations and subsonic and hypersonic aircraft are going to require much, much different airspace structures. And the fact is that we're going to be mixing military and civilian aircraft probably at these altitudes operating together. The military, has been operating in this kind of higher space environment for over 60 plus years, either in a defense or security or a scientific role. But we've been doing that with very limited partners in the same airspace. So it's going to be really interesting to see how we're going to approach this. Additionally, once again, airspace is sovereign. So all these, as we continue to go higher, does not remove the sovereignty of the airspace we have there, and trying to find the right structures and the means to manage that airspace is going to be very, very difficult. But I think really, that some of the solutions that we've been seeing, some of the approaches to trying to find solutions, such as ECHO and the stakeholder engagement and getting everyone who needs to use airspace in the same room is really important. And as FUA advances, the whole concept that needs to continue. We need to have all the stakeholders in the room. But in the end, like I said, airspace is a national resource, and it's going to have to be the states who decide how they want to engage and how they want to play. Continuing the same kind of thought, some of you who know me from the ECHO discussions, I like to talk about the high seas in aviation because, Article 12 of the Chicago Convention states that over the high seas, the rules in force shall be those under the convention, but it does not apply to state aircraft. And so we have civilian aircraft who are going to be operating in FIRs over the high seas with FUA structures or higher level airspace structures. And you're going to have state aircraft who may be operating out there with due regard. And the academic discussions on what due regard really means continues to this day. I am doing a advanced master's in air and space law as we speak. And there are books and books and books just on the legal concepts of how every signatory to the ICAO Chicago Convention interprets due regard differently. Now add FUA, add higher level airspace operations, add the fact now that you can have space launches from ships over the high seas, which may be commercial, but actually in some cases they're state or vice versa, multi-load things. You're causing a lot of issues and a lot of concern. And the North Sea, as I mentioned yesterday to some friends, is high seas. And so as you start building FUA structures and FUA concepts, you need to consider that. And those concepts need to acknowledge the realities of the Chicago Convention and the rights and privileges that belong to states. So in conclusion, because I'm not going to go too long, I think that we've been talking about FUA since 1996. I think there is a lot of levels of FUA, as you've mentioned, Pascal, which are important. And as we get more technology and more requirements, it's going to be important that we discuss that in a stakeholder environment to make sure that we can see what the allies and what the states can do. The key factors is we continue the CivMil coordination and cooperation and discussions, but there's a lot more stakeholders in the room who hold a lot more cards in their hand for the advancement and the success of FUA in the future. The practical application of FUA, collaboration, cooperation can only be achieved through stakeholder engagement. The realities that we face, we can't ignore them. We can't just say, we're going to focus on 3% of the problem when we have much larger things to also look at. And then some final thoughts. I'd like to highlight that the evolution and growth of commercial aviation has been founded on a requirement for peace. And as we've seen in Ukraine and other parts of the world, deterrence and defense and security are necessary to ensure that peace. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And thank you for helping us to identify some commonalities so far in terms of actions to be taken in future with regards to the evolution of FUA. And that's about to address a cross-border approach in order specifically for NATO interests, the required airspace for training to ensure defense and deterrence, integration of new entrants, another line of actions which needs to be considered. FUA over high seas, more and more we need to have a look into the topic. And finally, the main principle is about cooperation amongst all affected stakeholders. Thanks again, Stefan. Next, Christophe, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Remus, and good afternoon, everyone. Many things have been already said on flexible use of airspace. We are talking about flexible use of airspace since 96, as you said, Stefan. But to start my speech, I would like first to recall some principles which have been said, but it's always good to recall the obvious sometimes. First, states is a national airspace. Sorry, is a national sovereignty. This has been said, and no discussion on this. And I would add that airspace, there is no military airspace, there is no civil airspace. There is only one resource, one airspace, which is used by all stakeholders. And this is why also the flexible use of airspace principle is important, because the objective of this concept is to optimize the use of this single airspace by all stakeholders. So this is really the starting point of everything, how we can optimize the use of the airspace for different reasons, as mentioned by Pascal previously, being capacity, environmental, safety, but we need to optimize the use of the airspace, and this is really the objectives. Having said that, where we are in the EU regarding flexible use of airspace, I would quickly recall that first in 2004, the member states undertook a statement on military issues related to single European sky, in which they are saying that they will cooperate for the implementation of the flexible use of airspace. And in 2005 also, an EU regulation has been published recording that the implementation of flexible use of airspace is a national responsibility, recording the different level also recalled by ICAO and Pascal, strategic, pre-tactical, and tactical level, leading to this different level of cooperation, coordination, and collaboration. But later on in my speech, maybe I will mention another word, which is integration, an integrated way of working, but I will come back on it. And last but not least, now in the CEST2+ regulation, which will probably go to the end in autumn this year, flexible use of airspace is addressed, and there is a specific sentence which has been added, probably in light of the current security context, which is saying that in case of significant operational difficulties impairing the safeguard of essential security or defense policy interest, member states may temporarily suspend application of flexible use of airspace. So this is something which is also new and relevant in light of the current context, as I said. To complement this single European sky regulation, I would also mention the Common Project 1 regulation, which is in relation to the deployment of CESAR solution. And this Common Project 1 regulation includes a dedicated family related to airspace management and advanced flexible use of airspace, and the deployment of this family has been completed. Having recalled a little bit this regulatory context in EU, where we are today with flexible use of airspace, because as already said, we worked a lot on it. First, as said by Stephen, and as a matter of fact, military activities or the military training areas are not a root cause of delays of CO2 emission. This is clear. This has been said already in some report from the performance review body. So this needs to be taken into account. However, the military made already significant efforts in implementing the flexible use of airspace, both financial efforts, but also in investing in human resource. They evolved the way they are using the training areas. Particularly, they implemented, for instance, modular training areas. This is already existing, and only some part of the areas are activated according to the civil air traffic. Also, sometimes there are some period during the week when they are not planning some training exercise, or where they are not activating some training area. Also, there are some processes in place now to plan the big exercise to minimize the impact on civil air traffic, and this is done mainly through EUROCONTROL. and the best example is the last big air exercise, Air Defender, which happened last year with a minimum impact on civil air traffic. So many things have been already done on the military side, while we can admit that sometimes it's difficult for civil aviation to take the advantage and the benefits of all these efforts made by the military. So there is a kind of frustration also on the military side because they are deployed many efforts with sometimes a few benefits on the civil side. Also, and this is why the military are trying to push, because this is linked to the performance objective, maybe to the development of an indicator to measure the civil use of the airspace released by the military. This is something which might be interesting. I know that EUROCONTROL is already working on a study on this, but it will be interesting to analyze the results and to see to which extent the civil aviation is able to take advantage of the airspace released by the military, particularly without sufficient notice. And last but not least, the point I would like to mention is that we need also to take into account the local specificities, because we are talking about harmonizing flexible use of airspace. I would say yes, but until a certain extent. But we cannot, all the different area of Europe or of the world is not the same, and we need to take into account really some regional or local specificities. Now, having said that, things maybe will force us to move ahead and to improve the flexible use of airspace. Some aspects have already been mentioned, particularly the integration of new entrants in the airspace. Now with high-speed vehicles, we cannot look only within our borders. We need to cooperate and we need to expand a little bit the way we are working beyond our border, and this is also valid for the flexible use of airspace. So we will need to think how to manage now the integration of these new entrants. I will mention also the integration of drones in the low altitude, because now, for safety, security reason, we are thinking about how to manage the airspace, particularly outside controlled airspace. How to be sure that in a certain airspace, we will ensure safety and security in relation to the drone's operation. And this is why we are talking about dynamic airspace reconfiguration or configuration. And this is a topic on which we should work. And what I want to say by the integration of new entrants, I think this might be a game changer to also evolve the way we are addressing flexible use of airspace in the conventional airspace. Flexible use of airspace is also not only a military principle, but a civil military principle and concept, and this requires the implication of all stakeholders involved in the system of systems of the aviation domain, from airports, airlines, NSPs, and so on. And we need to work together. So this has been said already, but we need to work together, and working together will also increase mutual trust, because this is sometimes what is missing. On both sides, not only on the civil side, but also on the military side. We need to really increase our mutual trust. We need to monitor the right indicators to see the efficiency of the flexible use of airspace. We need, as I said before, maybe CURA might be one, but maybe we can also review what are the relevant indicators. We can share best practices. This is important. So this is how we can improve flexible use of airspace, and we should maybe follow a more pragmatic approach rather than a dogmatic approach, and really to identify what are the problems, what are the specific areas in which we can have some improvements, some benefits, and focus on this, but not working through a systematic, holistic, dogmatic approach. I would like also to mention all the EU programs, which are also an opportunity for the military to improve flexible use of airspace by improving ATM data exchange. I would like just to mention one project, which is currently funded by European Defence Fund, which is CEST interoperability, CEST IOP, which aim to adapt military RC2 control and command system to integrate CEST regulations, including flexible use of airspace, and to exchange data between civil and military aviation. And we can also obviously exploit all the Horizon Europe program in the framework of CESAR, GU, and CESAR deployment. And we can take the advantage of this. And last but not least, we can use the new technology also to improve the flexible use of airspace, being artificial intelligence, automation, and data analytics, once again, to enhance airspace management capabilities. So to conclude my speech, I hope I have not been too long. I will just say that what is important is to work in a synchronized manner on the operational, technology, and regulatory aspects. If we are working only to one aspect, we will miss something. We really need to work on all these three aspects. With this, I conclude my speech, Remus, and many thanks again.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Indeed, it's very important to me, at least, what you mentioned about identifying pointed issues in FUA and working on them, with also considering the local specifics when it comes to FUA. The goal should be to optimize the use of airspace. And here maybe we need to have a look on how civil aircraft operators are using the opportunities provided throughout FUA outcomes to monitor how the airspace is used and to identify the best ways to optimize. Another interesting topic here is to add integration to collaboration, coordination, and cooperation. That needs a specific attention, especially when it comes to the new entrants in the traditional airspace and ATM operations. And finally, I think indeed we need to have a look on those situations when FUA is suspended. You know, it's easy to suspend something which was built throughout 3 decades, but we need to take care about resuming and how to continue to use the airspace, which in the end will remain shared in any situation. Thank you very much again. And I give the floor now to Giuseppe Acampora, please.
Yes, thanks, Remus, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here in this webinar and to provide some feedback from NM perspective. I'm the last. Thanks to my colleagues, most have been already said, so I'll try to focus a little bit more on the operational side, being network manager fully involved in the operation. It was mentioned several times from my colleague that FUA is already implemented more than 25 years, and the provocative questions from my side, as you said in the workshop, was said the why FUA is evident. The question could be, is it still a relevant question of FUA today? And I ask Claire if I can share one slide to start a little bit, because my answer is now more than ever, it's important FUA. This is just to give a plastic view of the European situation at this stage, where we have more than 4,000 areas, with more 37% of airspace, and without FUA cannot work. But for a specific reason, as I said, the FUA can already facilitate this kind of management, but we have to consider that the situation is going to become complex and more complex. We said even if we keep such a picture, a static picture, and it's not the case, already my colleague from NATO announced and mentioned what we expect in the future from a military side, we have to consider traffic, civil traffic is growing. Is continuing growing. This year, I would say we reached already the levels of 2019, so pre-COVID. We have around 30,000 flights per day, and we are expecting 2030 to reach 15,000 flights per day. And I say today we already reach in some areas, we are already above the level of 2019. One of the lessons learned in these years is that situations, specific situation can hamper a linear growth of the traffic. So we have a certain unpredictability, volatility in this growth, but the growth will continue. So this is something that will not disappear. It will be just one element of additional complexity to face with this kind of unpredictability in the growth of the traffic that will certainly require a certain resilience for the system. But as I said, beside this civil traffic growth that is expected, we are already facing with this. The military are going to improve their request of airspace significantly compared with the previous years. Mentioned the new airspace required by new aircraft generation. More and more states are requiring the implementation of huge areas. And the other important point we are facing these last 2 years, I would say, is the exponential growth of large-scale military exercise. You mentioned before some of my colleagues, they are defender that was in Germany, so one of the biggest exercise in Europe never had. But I would say this is not the only one that can address our attention and our involvement as network manager, because with this exponential growth, even those that are small in terms of scale, large scale exercise, there are many that are performed simultaneously in several parts of Europe, and all of them make noise. So all of them needs to be treated at network level. This also gives an idea about the need to have a network approach to face such a kind of a new situation. When I say new situation, continuing with the complexity, as mentioned already by my colleague, new entrance is a new client that we need to take in consideration. And again, it's not something for the future, it's something already happened. It's already in the last 2 years, we have more and more cases that we are coordinating and planning the preparation of such a kind of new entrance requirement. I remember that in 2 years ago, when we have this famous Virgin Orbit exercise that was a corridor from UK to Canary, from ground unlimited, that for 2 hours de facto closed all the airspace and all the traffic from South America and so on was not possible to fly at all. So this has a clear impact on the civil traffic. The way we manage so far this kind of event is in the standard, I would say, conventional FUA approach. So segregating the airspace according to the standard way of segregating the airspace. But again, the example I made, we closed the airspace for 2 hours for maybe 15 minutes of flight. Is it the right way of proceeding? This is one area of possible evolution in the future about the application of FUA for this new client. Situation of Europe is also complicated a lot in the last 2 years for the situation about Ukraine. We are in what we call now very often several forms, the new normal situation we have in Europe, where we have a big portion of space closed totally. But the difficulty is that whenever it's completely closed, there is no discussion. So we don't need to think about the FUA and so on, or sharing airspace between civil and military. This is clear. The problem is around, because around is the normal situation. Say that we need to accommodate the civil traffic. There is a big impact on the traffic flows. And this compare with in conjunction with the larger scale exercise, for instance, or new areas request, you can imagine the situation could be more complex. We don't speak about performance because already we spoke before. We have a magic formula. There is no magic formula, but certainly there is a lot of initiative at different level try to cope with this situation. FUA is one of the key elements. The network manager is playing a key role in ensure that the European level We can implement what Pascal mentioned, advanced flexible use of airspace. We have a very, I would say, compared with other areas of Europe, of the world, sorry, very sophisticated application, very dynamic process in place today. That offer a certain dynamicity and facility from the airspace users to minimize as much as possible in the basic principle concept of FUA the need to close the airspace and therefore to release as much as possible from the civil side. Coordination is a key role already mentioned by my colleague, collaboration between the different partners. There is no situation that can be solved now as a standalone by a single state, although FUA, as stressed several times correctly, is a national responsibility at the end of the story. They have to take the decision. This collaboration at the European level now is a key word, a key element, and the role of network manager is more and more evident in managing evolution of the FUA. So although the FUA is more than 25 years old, we have lots of evolution, new technology implemented, a new process and procedure in place, a more dynamic process. The more dynamic process is quite important to mention, because more dynamic process means for this, the interpretation could be that we are more and more playing at a tactical level. The approach we are following is to have a more and more dynamic plannable process. So we need to ensure that we have a full sharing of information with our partner to improve as much as possible the planning of the operations, because it's where that we can achieve a better predictability of the traffic evolution and therefore the possibility to have a better capacity planning. So this kind of dynamic process we have in Europe, the possibility to share information every 30 minutes is certainly one clear example of how we can go in the direction to have a more dynamic process, but promoting better the planning operations. We have other solution modularities also be mentioned by my colleagues is there. We are working on the identification of advanced solution in managing the modularity or ISM scenario. So the combination of areas, clustering the areas to addressing major traffic flows in a more harmonized way. And certainly we have in the pipeline future evolution of the FUA concept, both in terms of strategy project, but also in terms of CESR validation. We have a clear example, as mentioned before by Christophe, the idea to introduce artificial intelligence, machine learning capability that will facilitate the management, the processing of massive data that will improve the collaborative decision-making process between the partner. We are speaking a lot about the in terms of validation, mobile areas is a term that you heard, probably some of you already heard. This is quite interesting, especially if you consider now at the European level, we have a full implementation of free route, and more we are moving in terms of a regional free route application. And the implementation of mobile areas would be the next step of sophisticated solution that we can add to the toolbox. I call toolbox in terms of FUA, that we will have a more and more option that the states can take on board. We are promoting, we use the word harmonization, but I agree with Vivier that we don't have a blueprint solution applicable everywhere. We have differentiation, we have peculiarity between the states, but certainly the possibility to share best practices across Europe is one of the another effort we are making to facilitate a better application of FUA. If there is something that is doing better, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I can just see whether it is applicable in my area. One last point to give more time for the questions, as mentioned mentioned also by my previous colleagues. It is true, civil military, we made a lot of effort. There is a good, excellent cooperation at the European level. The capability to minimize the allocation of the space is very good. But the next step is important as well. So all these efforts should be taken on board by the civilians, as Vivienne said. So we are improving a lot the awareness and cooperation with the airspace users to be sure that they are using as much as possible the opportunity that are offered, and not tactically, because tactically they will use it. They are air traffic controllers, they give them the shortcut through the areas and so on. But we want to have a better planning by them to ensure that we have a good predictability at European level. So in a nutshell, the last word is we need this collaboration at the European level. Certainly, international organization like Network Manager in collaboration with our dear colleagues of the other is something that we need to persevere, we need to pursue in order to have as much as possible efficient in European airspace. Thanks for the attention, Remus.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe, for bringing these operational views into the discussion. We can notice the highlight you put on the impact of military training and exercises on the traffic flows in Europe, which cannot be neglected indeed. And that requires prior coordination and sharing of information so that to identify the best solutions to reduce the impact on the traffic flows. We could also notice the solutions addressed by EUROCONTROL in terms of evolving from FUA to advanced FUA throughout the first step, which is addressing modularity of airspace to be placed as much as possible outside the traffic routes throughout Europe. And then the next step would be to bring more dynamicity in both planning and execution phases with regards to the reservation of airspace. Thanks again to all the speakers for your insights. And we launch now the questions and answers session. I would like first to thank you, the audience, for sending us in advance their questions. We will try to address also those coming live on the chat. And the first questions we received in advance was addressing the cooperation amongst the four organizations. So basically, the question is talking about a steering organization. Is that the case to discuss about a steering organizations when it comes to the implementation of FUA, or should be clear principles and maybe methodologies to be discussed in terms of collaboration between your organizations? I would like to ask you to discuss a bit on the margins of this question.
I can start if you want.
Yeah, please.
Much better than we can start.
Steering organization, what does it mean? That one organization should take the lead on FUA. We said from the very beginning, and this has been said by many speakers, that flexible use of airspace is a state responsibility first. So it will be, from my perspective, difficult for an organization to take the lead, because you would have a kind of leading organization imposing things to states, and this is what we need to avoid. I'm much more in favor of a collaborative work. We have already many processes in place to work together, either between the organization, and we are working well between EDA, EUROCONTROL, NATO. We are working very well when needed with the Commission. We are doing that. We have institutional groups, and there are also a collaborative decision-making process in place. So maybe this process should be improved if needed. But once again, we need to identify first what are the problem, what need to be improved, and if it's the case, let's see what can be improved. But I'm much more in favor of a collaborative work working together rather than to nominate one leading organization or whatever. It's really, from my perspective, FUA should rely on collaboration.
So, Christophe, you have to stop reading my mind. That's the first thing. I think it's really important that you highlighted that the states are the decision makers. There are some environments, I think, that some of the international organizations can create to help the decision makers make decisions. And I was talking about ECHO earlier on from the higher level airspace perspective. You know, similar concepts where we have all the stakeholders in a room, I think are important, so that all the different stakeholders understand the requirements, the views, the visions, and we can share that information. But in the end, it's going to be the states who make the final decision.
Yeah, if I may, certainly I fully agree with my colleagues. So in terms of FUA, the state has the final words in one way or another. The regulations at European level clearly push for the collaboration mentioned by Vivier. And this collaboration should be a structured collaboration between the different stakeholders. Eurocontrol has a very organized working arrangements addressing all the different elements, structure from the very operational level to medium high level management from the different stakeholders. The regulation also implementing network manager ask for this kind of collaboration with the stakeholders, asking the stakeholder to participate to this working arrangement, because this is the key word. Despite the final decision, as I mentioned before in my speech, it is not possible to work anymore in splendid isolation. So even if the decision is taken at a national level, there is a need to make such a kind of coordination. This is well understood, I would say, from the stakeholder. That's why the collaboration is, I would say, very good. Could be improved, certainly should be improved based on the evolution of the requirement. But certainly it is very naive at this stage, I would say, that someone pretended to do alone. The effect at network level are so immediate, so evident that such a kind of a cooperation at all level, I said, from a operational point of view until up a managerial point of view is very evident. And the role of network manager in the respect of the national authorities to take the final decision in collaboration with our stakeholder. I'm thinking about NATO cooperation for the preparation of large scale exercise when we have involvement on several states. Our final role is to provide as much as possible advice, information. Sharing information again is another key word to this relevant stakeholders to facilitate their final decision. So this is the key role that needs to be reinforced as much as possible. Sharing information, communication, as Pascal said before, is our key words to be sure that who has to take the decision has the full picture of the situation that is now at the European level.
And if I may add, from the international point of view, so Europe is probably a region where you have already taken the matter in your hands, you're already moving forward, so ICAO has little to do but applaud and learn. If we look at the whole world, there are three elements and three levels of interventions we're looking into. The first one is information, the second is emulation, and the third one is voluntary bilateral cooperation. Information, in some areas of the world, this concept is still very theoretical or even not known. And just the fact of informing and changing the habits is something useful that we do through our regional offices. And there are big low-hanging fruits in some areas of the world, which we're trying to use. Emulation is what we're trying to do at the world level by showing when operators go to an area, a region of the world, and see that it's flexible use of airspace and that it's working. Well, they will also want this to happen in other places. And lastly, there is the voluntary bilateral cooperation, which we encourage. We don't foresee, given the very nature of the military component, that we can have one world organization for civil and military cooperation. But Bilateral, we encourage bilateral cooperations where trust exists, when the geopolitical context exists, to allow to share the best practices to supplement what is given at different regions. And certainly this is something, when we see regions cooperating on this, we see this as a very positive. And also linking on one of the questions which has been asked in the chat, there can be cooperation without the exchange of fundamentally sensitive information, and that's the core that can exist across regions. And then, of course, within a region, you can have an additional level of trust within countries which have a stronger military cooperation. So there can be two levels of cooperation: one with no confidential information, and the other one with confidential information.
If I may, Remus, quickly, and then I'll give you the floor for the next question to complement what Pascal said. It's interesting what you said, emulation and so on. Personally, I was involved in several workshops in Asia, Africa, and so on, organized by ICAO and so on, to explain how FUA is applied at a European level. That, as we said, we have already, I don't say we are very, very advanced, but we are advanced compared with other areas. And of course, I see the eagerness from the States. Okay, why we can do tomorrow after tomorrow. And I recall the word of Pascal, the initial of the speech. To implement FUA takes time. It's not something that you build up from one day to another, because first of all, you need to build up the trust between civil and military. And in Europe, although we are so advanced, it was not something we got it from 1 year to another or from one day to another. It took time. I was working in my previous life on the military side, and I remember how was difficult the initial cooperation. But this is a learning process. Therefore, the opportunity to look at others can facilitate also the spread of best practices, not only across Europe, but across the world.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Indeed, I think that collaboration amongst your organizations is key, and maybe improvement of a collaborative decision-making framework should be also helpful in order to mainly communicate in a synchronized manner, so that to help the member states to be informed and to have that kind of voluntary participation to the implementation of FUA based on good knowledge, good information, and good collaboration. Thank you very much. You have all addressed a cross-border principle when it comes to the evolution of FUA. I would recall here also that recently 13 NATO allies have sent a letter of intent with the aim of developing collaboration for the establishment of cross-border airspaces. I would kindly ask you to elaborate a bit what could be, let's say, from each of you, one or two main principles to be followed when establishing cross-border airspaces, especially considering the sovereignty of states over the airspace.
I'm going to start, since it was working through the NATO initiative. A couple key things that's important in kind of build these cross-border relationships and airspace kind of structures is, one is you need to engage all the stakeholders involved, because the airspace is going to have an effect on a lot more than just the military traffic. So it's really important to listen to the stakeholders. It need to respect the fact that you need the sovereignty of the allies of the states. They are critical. They'll make their decisions on how they want to apply it. The experts can provide all the advice, and I'm sure they'll listen to the experts from around the aviation environment on what would be the best to achieve what they need to do. Three things we push at NATO is interoperability, both civ-mil, but also with mil-mil. Resilience, making sure we have resilient structures and capabilities to support that, and the security aspect of it, because some of the training needs to have secure information and therefore won't be visible. Those are the key things. And remember, without peace and security, it's hard to do what we're doing.
If I may, I will continue on my side. The concept of cross-border area, cross-border operations is old like the FUA concept, because it was one of the first elements introduced and is also strongly recommended by the Single European Sky Regulation about cross-border operation. In reality, it's not so far, at least, not so common, even at the European level, that we said is very advanced, for several reasons. Security, one of the points, difficulties in apply harmonized procedure among the different states, how to use, who is going to use the space, priority, and so on. So there are different elements that complicate in a certain way the practical application of this very old concept. But certainly I would say that while in the past it was desirable to have a cross-border operation or cross-border area, with the new situation, it's no more desirable, it's a must. So this kind of cooperation among the states in the respect of security, in respect of whatever you want, needs to be strongly addressed by the community, ATM community, and certainly the support, again, to facilitate the decision of the national authorities. The cooperation between international organizations is essential to promote such a kind of approach.
Yes,
if I may to complement a bit, if we are talking about cross-border area or cross-border operation, from my perspective, is two different things. A cross-border area is an area which is over two neighboring states, and this there are some existing already cross-border areas, so this already exists, maybe not everywhere. But do we really need that? This is a question, and I don't have the answer. What maybe might be improved from my perspective, and we discussed that with the European Air Group some years ago, is maybe to have not only a national approach when we are making the planning of our activities. We are only thinking on our national training areas, which might be used. Maybe we can use some other areas in a neighboring states. Maybe this concept should be further developed by fostering the collaboration with the different AMC, airspace management cell. Maybe an airbase located in south of France can use or might use a training area located north of Spain. This maybe might be developed. However, this is raising also many issues, as already said. But we need to identify first what would be the added value. If once again the civil can take advantage of these additional efforts made by the military, and what are the different problems and what can be the solution. So once again, we can always think to different aspects, cross-border areas or cross-border operation. But first, we need to be sure that these efforts will bring benefits, and this is feasible.
Yes, if I can add, indeed the cross-border cooperation, to know where it's useful, you need to take a map, take a rubber, remove the frontiers, and then see where the airspace makes sense. And I think you will see where this cross-border cooperation is needed. Then there's the reality of sovereignty, and there again, ICAO has to emphasize this is a sovereign decision of the state, and there's never going to be any pressure when it's not possible. One key element which was raised by Christophe and also by one of the questions is indeed we have to better know where the flexibility and when we're talking about advanced FUA, where it is really going to be able to be used. Generally in conferences, you have the airline saying, well, we can't use it because we get it so late or for X reasons. And the military say, oh, we did so many efforts and then they didn't use it. I believe there's always going to be a little margin in the middle that will be wasted. We won't have a perfect gap where we use all the flexibility, but this margin is reducing. And in cross-border area, if we do cross-border operations, we know that we're reducing this margin and making sure that we make the best use. So it will be a sovereign decision of the states, and we can only highlight the benefits.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm afraid we came to an end with our webinar. We even exceeded a bit the time. Thank you very much for your views. Thank you very much for the discussions. And I'm really sorry for not being able to address all the questions we had in the list. By saying that, I hope that the audience have enjoyed the webinar. And I also encourage the audience to stay tuned for other Eurocontrol webinars. And the next one is a webinar on cyber that will be taking place on the 28th of May this year. Thank you very much again, everybody, and wish you a nice day to all.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye all.
Thanks to all.